I never thought I'd be the one writing this, let alone sharing it with anyone. Even now, it feels unreal, like I'm standing on the sidelines, watching my own life unravel in slow motion. I suppose that's what happens when everything you believed in suddenly crumbles. My name's Mike. I'm 35, working as a heating and cooling tech in Scranton, Pennsylvania. It's a good job, steady pay, hands-on work, not exactly thrilling, but it's provided a decent life for me and my family. My wife, Sarah, and I have been together for 10 years. She's 32, and she's been home full-time with our kids, Josh, who's 8, and Emily, who's 5. They're great kids. Josh is crazy about baseball, and Emily's got a thing for horses. We're pretty much your average suburban family. Our neighborhood is one of those quiet places where all the houses look like they were stamped from the same mold, neatly kept lawns, shiny cars in the driveways, and neighbors who wave as they walk their dogs. Sarah manages most of the house stuff, running errands, getting the kids to school, figuring out dinner. I handle the bigger chores, fixing whatever breaks, working long hours, and making sure the bills are paid on time. To the outside world, we probably seem like we've got it all together. But if you looked a little closer, you'd see things haven't been quite right for a while now. I can't pinpoint when it started, but at some point, Sarah and I just began drifting apart. We stopped talking as much. Things in the bedroom became predictable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. But we kept going. No big fights, no blowouts, just a quiet distance growing between us that I kept pushing aside, convincing myself it was just what happens after so many years of marriage. And then came Tim. Tim and I go way back, since we were kids, really. We grew up in the same part of town, went to the same high school, even worked a few summer gigs together. After college, he moved away, got married to a girl from Boston. But things didn't work out, and word around here was that she cheated on him. After his divorce, he came back to town and rented a place just down the street from us. We hadn't stayed in touch much over the years, but we picked up right where we left off, hanging out like old times. He'd come over to watch a game or we'd have a couple of beers in the driveway while the kids played in the yard. At first, it was nice having Tim around again. He was going through his own stuff, trying to get his life back together after the divorce. But soon, I noticed something strange. He started coming by when I wasn't home. I'd pull up after a long day at work, and there was his truck parked in front of my house. He'd shrug it off, saying he was just helping Sarah with something, moving furniture, fixing this or that. He's always been a helpful guy, but it was starting to feel a little too convenient. One night, I got home around 9 after a long day, and sure enough, there's Tim's truck outside. The house was dark, and everything was quiet. When I walked in, Sarah was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone like it was no big deal. "Hey, did Tim stop by?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, he helped me move the old couch into the garage." "What took you so long?" she said, like nothing was out of the ordinary. "Work ran late," I answered, but something in me shifted. I brushed it off that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Before long, I started seeing Tim show up more and more. He'd swing by while I was working, and then I'd catch Sarah smiling a little too much whenever she mentioned his name. At first, I told myself it was just the old friendship rekindling, but then, one evening, as I was grabbing a beer from the fridge, I noticed Sarah laughing at something on her phone. When I asked her what was so funny, she quickly brushed it off, saying it was just a message from Stacy, her best friend. But I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen. It wasn't Stacy. It was Tim. Now, I've never been the jealous kind, or at least I didn't think I was, but this was starting to eat at me. I needed to know if I was just being paranoid or if there was something more going on. Tim had just gone through a messy breakup, and Sarah had been distant for months. Was I putting together random pieces, or was there something real happening behind my back? Then, 2 days later, everything changed with a single message. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was sitting on the porch, mindlessly checking my phone, when a new Facebook notification popped up. I clicked it, and there it was, a message from a blank profile. No picture, no friends, nothing, just a short, simple sentence: "She's not who you think she is." It hit me like a brick to the chest. I stared at the message, frozen, my mind spinning. Was someone messing with me? A prank? But something in my gut told me it wasn't. And suddenly, all the things I had ignored, the looks, the laughs, the way Sarah was around Tim, they all came crashing back, louder and clearer than ever. I had to know the truth. After I saw that message, something shifted inside me. I couldn't shake the idea that everything I had been brushing off, the late-night texts, Tim hanging around too much, Sarah's strange behavior, was all connected. That Facebook message set something off in me. I didn't know what I'd uncover, but one thing was clear: I couldn't just sit back and do nothing anymore. On the surface, life at home seemed normal enough, but that nagging doubt wouldn't leave me alone. I was still putting in long hours at work, coming home late, exhausted and covered in grime from fixing HVAC systems, and every time I walked through the door, Sarah was glued to her phone, barely acknowledging my presence. I'd hear her giggle here and there, but when I asked, she'd wave it off with, "Oh, it's just Stacy." That used to be enough for me, but now I found myself watching her closely, trying to catch any sign that something was off. The cracks in our marriage weren't visible to anyone else, but I felt them widening with each passing day. I still kissed her goodbye in the mornings, but her eyes never met mine like they used to. When we talked, it was all about the kids or logistics: who's picking up Josh from baseball, or don't forget Emily's recital next weekend. Any closeness between us felt forced, like we were just going through the motions of what a married couple should be, not what we once were. And then there was Tim. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was too involved in our lives. He was around way more than seemed normal, even when I wasn't home. One evening, I came home earlier than usual, and sure enough, Tim's truck was in the driveway. I quietly stepped inside, and there they were, Sarah and Tim, laughing about something in the kitchen. It seemed innocent enough at first glance, but the sight of them together made my gut twist. Later that night, after dinner, while Sarah was upstairs putting the kids to bed, I sat down at the computer. I wasn't proud of it, but I went ahead and ordered a cheap surveillance camera online, one of those basic models that's easy to set up and not too obvious. By the next weekend, I had it installed just outside, right by the garage, angled at the driveway. If Tim's truck showed up while I was gone, I'd know. I told myself it was just for peace of mind, but deep down, I knew it was something much darker. In the meantime, things at home only got more strained. Sarah was constantly on her phone, and every time I walked into the room, I'd catch her quickly swiping the screen to lock it. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed her phone light up on the nightstand while she was brushing her teeth in the bathroom. Curiosity got the better of me. I leaned over and saw the name on the screen, Tim. The message was short, just the word, tomorrow. Before I could process it, the screen went dark, and when Sarah came back, she grabbed the phone and locked it again without a word. I didn't bring it up right away, but that message gnawed at me for the rest of the night. The next morning, as we were having our usual coffee, I decided to confront her. "You've been texting Tim a lot lately, huh?" I tried to sound casual, like it was just idle conversation, but my heart was racing. Sarah barely glanced up from her cup. "Yeah, he's been helping me out with a few things around the house." "Why?" "I don't know. It just seems like you two have been talking more than usual." I tried to keep my tone light, but she finally looked me in the eye, her brow raised. "What's that supposed to mean? You know Tim's practically family. He's been through hell with his divorce, and I'm just being supportive." I hesitated, unsure of how far I should push. "It's just, you're always on your phone lately. I saw his name pop up last night, and it made me wonder." Sarah set her mug down, her expression shifting from relaxed to defensive. Are you checking my phone now? Is that where we're at? Seriously, Mike, he's my friend, and Stacy's too. You're acting like some paranoid, jealous husband. My face burned with embarrassment. She was turning this back on me, and for a moment, I questioned if I really was overreacting. But that message, "She's not who you think she is," kept echoing in my mind. "I'm not checking your phone," I lied. "I just saw it light up, that's all." Sarah let out a sigh and got up from the table. "Look, if this is about Tim, you've got nothing to worry about. He's just a friend. If you have a problem with that, maybe you should take a long look at yourself and figure out why you're so insecure." She left the room before I could respond, and I sat there, staring into my coffee, second-guessing everything. But I couldn't let it go. That nagging feeling in my gut was screaming at me now. So later that day, I decided to call Chris, my best friend. If anyone could give me some perspective, it'd be him. We'd known each other since high school, and he wasn't one to beat around the bush. When he picked up, I didn't waste any time. "Hey man, I need to run something by you." "Yeah. What's up?" Chris asked, sounding distracted. "It's Sarah and Tim. I don't know, something just feels off. She's been texting him a lot, and he's been coming around more when I'm not home." Chris paused for a second before replying. "Do you think there's something going on?" "I'm not sure. Maybe. They've known each other forever, but lately, it feels wrong. I even caught a text from him the other night, and she locked her phone right after. I don't know, man, maybe I'm imagining it." Chris's voice lowered. "You've known Tim for years, right? Look, it's possible you're overthinking it, but if your gut is telling you something, don't ignore it. I've been there, man. Trust your instincts." "I'm not trying to accuse her of anything without proof," I said, rubbing my temples in frustration. "But every time I bring it up, she gets defensive. Listen, if your instincts are firing off, keep paying attention. Just don't do anything drastic yet. Stay sharp, you'll know if something's really wrong." I thanked Chris, but even after we hung up, the unease didn't go away. I needed answers. That night, after Sarah had gone to bed, I found myself sitting in front of her laptop. I knew her passwords, she'd given them to me for all sorts of things over the years, and before I could stop myself, I typed one in and logged into her email. My hand shook slightly as I did it, guilt washing over me, but I couldn't help myself. If there was nothing there, I could put my mind at ease. When her inbox opened, everything seemed harmless enough at first: bills, subscription confirmations, a few emails from the kids' school. I was just about to close it when a name I didn't recognize caught my eye: Greg. His message to her was brief: "Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow night, same place." My heart dropped. Who the hell was Greg? In that moment, the cracks in my world became a full-on chasm. My mind went into overdrive, trying to figure out who this guy was, how long this had been happening, and how much she had been hiding from me. But I didn't confront Sarah, not yet. I knew if I exploded in anger, all I'd get were half-truths, denials, or worse, she might shut down entirely. I needed more. From that day on, every moment I spent around her felt like a lie just waiting to be uncovered. Sarah's behavior had become more erratic than ever before. She suddenly had an endless list of commitments: volunteering at the kids' school, lunches with friends, errands that seemed to take longer than they should. The excuses flowed so easily from her, each more casual than the last. "I'm heading out to help with the bake sale at Josh's school," she'd say, grabbing her purse without even glancing my way. "When do you think you'll be home?" I'd ask, pretending I didn't care, my eyes glued to my phone while secretly watching her every move. "Not sure," she'd reply with a smile. "Might grab lunch with the girls after." Every answer was like a faint version of the truth, just enough to seem normal, but now I wasn't sure any of it was. One evening, I followed her. It was a Wednesday, and she mentioned a parent-teacher meeting, but she left earlier than seemed necessary. Something wasn't right. I waited a while, then grabbed my keys and followed her, keeping a safe distance. I dimmed my headlights and hung back, making sure she wouldn't spot me. I watched as she drove out of the neighborhood, taking a turn that had nothing to do with the school. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter when I saw her pull into the parking lot of a Holiday Inn, a small, out-of-the-way hotel just on the edge of town. I parked across the street, trying to calm my breathing as I watched her car come to a stop. Moments later, a man walked out of the lobby, looking around before opening the passenger door for her. It was Greg, no doubt about it. They laughed together, and she leaned into him, just like she used to lean into me back when we first started dating. They disappeared inside the hotel without a second glance. I sat there, feeling numb and angry all at once. Every part of me wanted to storm in there, demand answers, but something held me back. Maybe it was the need for solid proof, or maybe I wasn't ready to face just how deep this went. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures, Sarah with Greg, walking into the hotel. Evidence. I wasn't going to confront her until I knew everything. For the next week, I kept my distance, but my mind was spinning. I began tracking her phone, checking every app, every message. She never left her phone lying around anymore, always keeping it close, even in the bathroom or the kitchen, like it was her most prized possession. I couldn't access her phone directly, but I found a way to mirror her text messages to my laptop without her knowing. It was an invasion of privacy, sure, but what she was doing wasn't exactly clean either. The messages between her and Greg started off innocent enough, just casual talk, but then I found the ones that were more intimate, full of photos and plans. They were meeting up once or twice a week, always at the same hotel, always with some flimsy excuse. But it wasn't just Greg. I saw mentions of other names that didn't mean anything to me at first: Dylan, Brad, Mike. It didn't add up until something clicked. I wasn't dealing with just one affair. Sarah was living a completely different life behind my back. I didn't know how deep it went, but I needed answers. Confronting Sarah wasn't an option yet. She was too good at twisting things around, turning every situation in her favor. Greg, on the other hand, wouldn't see me coming. I tracked down where he worked, some small insurance office downtown. The next day, during my lunch break, I walked in, fists clenched and heart pounding. It took everything I had not to drag him out by his collar right then and there. "Can I help you?" Greg asked, giving me that fake customer service smile as I stood by his desk. He didn't recognize me at first, of course not. To him, I was just another faceless husband caught in his string of flings. "Yeah, you can," I said, stepping closer. "You can stop sleeping with my wife." The color drained from his face as he realized who I was. "Listen, man, it's not what you think," he started, but I wasn't in the mood for his games. "I've seen the messages, Greg. I've got pictures, too, so spare me the lies. I know you've been meeting her at the Holiday Inn. You think I wouldn't find out?" He stammered, his face going beet red. "It's just, look, man, it's not serious. It's just fun. Harmless fun, that's all." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "You call sneaking around behind my back harmless?" Greg glanced around the office, clearly uncomfortable, but I wasn't about to make a scene, at least not yet. "Look, I didn't know you two were still together like that," he mumbled. "She said you guys were in some kind of open thing. She said you were cool with it." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What the hell are you talking about?" Greg stood up, his hands raised defensively. "She told me you knew, that you were into it." "I don't know, man. I'm not trying to start any trouble." I stepped back, my mind racing as I tried to process what he just said. Open relationship? She told him I was fine with this. None of it made any sense. I stormed out before I did something I'd regret, like smashing his face in right there. As I drove home, my mind was spinning. Had Sarah told all these guys that I knew? That I was somehow okay with it? And how many more were there? I started thinking about Tim. Maybe he wasn't involved at all. Maybe I'd been wrong about him. Suddenly, I didn't know who to trust. I avoided Tim from then on, unsure if he had been pulled into this without realizing it or if he was just playing dumb. Every time we passed each other in the neighborhood, there was a tension between us that hadn't been there before. The final straw came one afternoon when I overheard Sarah and Stacy talking in the kitchen. I hadn't planned on eavesdropping, but as I walked down the hallway, I heard Sarah's voice drop to a whisper, and something made me stop in my tracks. "You don't get it, Stace," Sarah was saying. "Greg was one thing, but now there's Brad, and Dylan won't stop texting me. It's getting out of control." My heart pounded in my chest as I pressed myself against the wall, trying to stay hidden. "And Mike doesn't suspect a thing?" Stacy asked, her voice low and curious. Sarah let out a laugh, but it wasn't one I recognized. "He's completely clueless. He's been so wrapped up in work, he barely notices when I'm out. And Tim? He's just the cover, he doesn't know about the others." It felt like a punch straight to the gut. Tim was just a distraction. So, he wasn't the one she was sneaking around with, but he was the smokescreen. And who the hell were Brad and Dylan? "It's that stupid app," Sarah went on. "It's like a whole community. I only signed up to see what it was like, but now it's gotten way more serious than I ever thought it would." I felt sick. This wasn't just about Greg. Sarah wasn't sneaking around with just one guy. She was involved in something much bigger, some online hookup community, juggling multiple men like it was some kind of game. I backed away from the kitchen, not wanting to hear any more. I couldn't stand being there for another second. I grabbed my keys and left the house, driving aimlessly for hours, trying to make sense of it all. My wife hadn't just been lying to me, she had created an entire secret life, one filled with men I didn't know, secrets I hadn't uncovered, and lies deeper than I ever imagined. The home I thought I knew had turned into a web of deception, and I was only just beginning to untangle it. The more I uncovered, the worse it got. It wasn't just Greg, or the other names Sarah had casually mentioned. The life I thought I had, a normal, stable marriage, was crumbling faster than I could comprehend. What Sarah had gotten herself into was beyond anything I could have dreamed up. After overhearing that conversation between her and Stacy, I knew I couldn't deal with this on my own. I needed help. That's when I decided to hire Lori, a private investigator I'd heard about from a guy at work. She wasn't just any PI. Lori specialized in online investigations. If Sarah had built a secret life online, Lori would be the one to expose it. I met Lori at a small diner just outside of town. She was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes that told me she wasn't easily fooled. We sat in a booth near the back, away from the handful of other customers, and I laid it all out, everything I knew about Greg, the other names I'd heard, and the messages I found. "I need to know how far this goes," I told her quietly. "She's using some kind of app, a hookup site. There's more to this than just Greg." Lori didn't bat an eye. She'd probably seen worse. "Give me access to whatever you have, texts, emails, anything, and I'll start there," she said, pulling out a notepad. "If she's involved in something bigger, I'll find it." It didn't take long. 2 days later, Lori called me to her office. When I walked in, she had a folder sitting on her desk, and the look on her face told me it wasn't good. "Mike, what I found, it's more than just an affair," she said, motioning for me to take a seat. "Sarah's part of an underground community. It's a swinger group." I stared at her, trying to wrap my head around what she was saying. Swingers? So this wasn't just casual cheating. This was organized, planned. They operate through private forums, encrypted messaging apps. "It's discreet, but not impossible to trace once you know where to look," Lori explained. They meet for, well, private sessions. It's not just one guy, Mike. There are several. And it's not just her. She handed me a stack of papers, screenshots of messages, photos from the forums, all connected back to Sarah. I saw her profile, one I'd never seen before, with a username I didn't recognize. But there she was, casually posting in forums about meetups, talking to other couples and individuals about upcoming events. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And here's something else, Lori said, flipping through the file. It looks like Tim might not be sleeping with her, but he knows about it. They've been messaging about these meetups. He's aware of what she's doing, but for some reason, he's staying quiet. I slumped back in the chair, my head spinning. So Tim wasn't involved with her physically, but he knew about the affairs, knew about the group, and didn't say a word. It felt like getting punched in the gut all over again. The guy I had trusted for years, my childhood friend, had been part of this lie the whole time. Does that mean Stacy knows too? I asked, already dreading the answer. Lori sighed. That's where it gets more complicated. I dug deeper into Stacy's involvement. Not only does she know, but she's a key player. Stacy's been part of this community for years, and from what I found, she's the one who got Sarah involved. She's the one who brought her into this. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. Stacy, the woman who sat at our dinner table, who watched our kids with Sarah, she was the mastermind behind all of this. I've got photos, Mike, Lori added, sliding another set of papers toward me. They were messages between Stacy and Sarah, planning everything. They've been going to these meetups together. It's not just casual hookups. It's a network. The photos showed what I feared most, Sarah at one of these events, dressed provocatively, laughing with strangers. There was a picture of her and Stacy sitting by a pool, drinks in hand, smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. My stomach churned. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my emotions in check. So, she's been doing this behind my back, with Stacy's help, and Tim knew? Lori nodded. It looks that way. I'm really sorry, Mike. I know this is a lot to handle, but you've got the proof now. Proof. That was the word that stuck with me. I had the evidence, but what was I going to do with it? I couldn't keep living in this house, pretending like everything was normal. I had to confront her. I thanked Lori and left her office, the folder heavy in my hands. That night, I sat in the car outside my house for over an hour, staring at the front door, trying to figure out what I was going to say. There was no easy way to do it. I had to confront her, had to get the truth. When I finally walked inside, the house was quiet. The kids were already asleep, and Sarah was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone like she always did. I set the folder down on the table in front of her without saying a word. She looked up at me, confused, then down at the folder. Her face turned pale as she opened it, flipping through the pages. I watched her eyes widen as she took in the screenshots, the photos, the messages. Mike, I can explain, she started, her voice shaky, but I cut her off. Explain what? I snapped. That you've been lying to me for months. That you're part of some underground swinger group. That you've been with God knows how many men while I've been busting my back to keep this family together. Sarah's hands shook as she closed the folder. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, Sarah, I demanded, my voice rising. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been living a double life. She broke down then, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Mike, I swear. It started out, it was just something to break the boredom. We got stuck in a routine. I felt trapped. Stacy introduced me to it, and at first, it was just to see what it was like, but then. I don't know. It got out of control. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you did this because you were bored? Because our life wasn't exciting enough for you? Sarah sobbed, wiping her eyes with trembling hands. It was never about love, Mike. It wasn't that. It was just for the thrill. Something different. I didn't mean for it to go this far, I swear. My anger was bubbling up. So you dragged me into this mess. Let Tim cover for you. Let Stacy pull you into this. She lowered her head, staring at the table, unable to meet my gaze. Stacy, she pushed me into it. I thought I could handle it, but I was wrong. You think? I shot back bitterly. I stood up, pacing the kitchen, trying to keep myself in check. What am I supposed to do now, Sarah? Pretend this never happened? You've been lying to me, cheating on me, for who knows how long. She sat there in silence, her tears falling onto the folder I had given her, looking completely broken. But I couldn't find any pity for her, not after everything she'd done. I need time to think, I said, turning my back on her and walking out of the room. I needed to get away, from her, from the house, from everything. The life I thought we had was nothing more than a web of lies, carefully spun, and now I was tangled in it, trying to figure out how to break free. The deeper I pulled at the threads, the more everything began to unravel. When I walked out of that kitchen, it felt like the weight of everything was finally crashing down on me. Divorce seemed like the logical answer, but actually going through with it. That was a whole different story. Part of me wanted to wipe the slate clean, pack up, and leave everything behind. But the other part, the one tied to our kids, to the life we'd built together, hesitated. Divorce wasn't just a simple solution, it was a wrecking ball aimed at everything, and once it hit, there'd be no stopping the damage. Lori called me the next day, checking in. You've got enough to file, she said in that calm, professional tone, like she'd done this 100 times before. You can push for infidelity. Between the photos, the messages, and her involvement in that group, you'll come out with most of the assets if you go for it, especially since she's been using marital funds for these activities. I let out a long sigh, rubbing my temples. What about the kids? Lori paused. That's always tougher, but with everything I found, you'd have a strong case for primary custody. Especially if her involvement in that group comes to light. Courts don't usually favor parents involved in, well, activities like that. I sat there in silence, weighing her words. Divorce was becoming more real with every conversation, but the emotional toll was enormous. How would I explain this to Josh and Emily? How would I protect them from all of this? The last thing I wanted was to tear their world apart because of Sarah's decisions. But staying with her felt impossible now. I'll think about it, I finally said. You should, Lori replied, her voice firm. But don't wait too long. If you're not careful, she could turn this around on you. And there's something else. What's that? I asked, already bracing for more bad news. I've been keeping tabs on that group, she said, her tone shifting. It seems like Tim and Stacy are actively recruiting new couples. They're organizing a big weekend getaway in the Poconos next month. Sarah's on the invite list. A chill ran down my spine. So this wasn't over. Sarah had promised to stop, to quit the group, but now it looked like she was already planning her next escape. I gritted my teeth as Lori continued. They're being cautious, but not cautious enough. From what I've gathered, this isn't just casual anymore. It's turning into something bigger. Tim and Stacy are involved in organizing these trips, bringing new people into the fold. You need to be careful, Mike. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my composure. What are you saying? That this could blow up in more ways than one, Lori replied. Exactly. This group has drawn some attention, and not the good kind. I don't have all the details yet, but there's talk of coercion, maybe even non-consensual acts going on. Law enforcement is circling. I straightened up, my mind racing. Wait, are you saying there's an investigation? I don't know how deep it goes yet, but yes. I wouldn't be surprised if they come knocking soon. And with Sarah on that invite list, she's in deeper than she realizes. Every instinct in me wanted to blow this wide open. Tim, Stacy, Sarah, they were all caught up in something much darker than I'd ever imagined. I thanked Lori and hung up, my mind whirling as I tried to figure out my next move. Sarah had tried to convince me she wanted to fix things. She'd said everything I wanted to hear, that she was done with the group, that it had all been a mistake, but now I knew better. The weekend getaway proved it. She was still involved, still planning, and any remorse she'd shown was hollow, just a way to keep me from digging any deeper. That night, after the kids were in bed, Sarah sat across from me at the kitchen table, her face still drawn from our confrontation a few days ago. "I've been thinking," she started, her voice soft. "I know I've made mistakes, and I'm ready to stop all of it. I'll cut off contact with the group, with Greg, with everyone. I want to fix this." I looked at her, trying to see if there was any truth in her words. I let the silence linger between us for a while before speaking. "You're telling me you're done?" I asked, my voice flat. "That there's nothing else?" "Yes," she nodded quickly. "I'm done." "Then why are you invited to a weekend getaway with Tim and Stacy next month?" I asked, my tone icy. "And don't even try to lie, Sarah, because I already know." Her face turned pale, and she opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She hadn't expected me to know about the trip. I had caught her completely off guard. I don't know what to say," she finally whispered, her eyes dropping to the table. "I do," I said, standing up and heading toward the door. "You're still lying. You're not sorry. You're just sorry you got caught." Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't bring myself to care. It wasn't that I felt nothing, I felt everything. But after all she'd put me through, I wasn't about to let myself be manipulated again. I left the room before she could say anything else. The next week passed in a blur. I barely spoke to Sarah, focusing on work and the kids, but the thought of that trip in the Poconos gnawed at me. I knew something had to be done, and there was no way I was going to let her dig herself deeper into this mess. Then, just days before I was planning to confront her again, Lori called. "You need to know something," she said. "I've been following up on what I mentioned before. Law enforcement has started investigating the group. Some of the people involved, Stacy, Greg, they're under investigation." "For what?" I asked, feeling a pit form in my stomach. "There are allegations of coercion, exploitation, and non-consensual acts. It's not just cheating anymore, Mike, it's criminal. They've been using the group as a cover for darker things, and Tim and Stacy are at the center of it." My head was spinning. I didn't know how far this went, but I knew one thing for sure, this was no longer just about my marriage. Sarah was tangled up in something that could destroy her, not just emotionally, but legally. Is she involved in any of that?" I asked, dreading the answer. "From what I can tell, no," Lori said. "But she's connected to the people who are. If this blows up, her name could get dragged into it. You need to act before it's too late." I sat down, running a hand through my hair. The idea of Sarah getting pulled into a criminal investigation on top of everything else was overwhelming. The kids, the house, our entire lives, could come crashing down. Should I go to the police? I asked, unsure of my next step. Lori paused. "That's your call. But if I were you, I'd confront her one last time. Lay it all out. She needs to understand what she's risking. If she doesn't take it seriously now, it'll be too late later." That night, I waited for Sarah to come home. The tension in the air was thick as she walked through the door. I didn't waste any time. "Sit down," I said, pointing to the table. She froze, sensing that something was wrong. "What's going on?" "I know everything," I said, my voice steady but cold. Tim, Stacy, the group. There's an investigation, Sarah, law enforcement is involved. You're not caught up in it yet, but you're close. Her face drained of color as she slowly sat down, staring at me in disbelief. You're lying, she whispered, shaking her head. There's no way. I'm not lying, I cut in. Lori found out. Stacy and Greg are under investigation for coercion, exploitation. The group you've been part of? It's not just some harmless fun anymore, it's criminal. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't back down. If you keep going down this path, you're going to lose everything, the kids, the house, your freedom. You've got a choice, Sarah, walk away now or get caught in something you can't escape. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. But I didn't move, didn't comfort her. I just sat there, waiting to see what she'd do. This was it, her last chance to take responsibility and salvage what was left of our shattered life. I didn't know how far the investigation would go or what the fallout would be, but one thing was clear, the consequences were already in motion. And it was up to Sarah whether she'd face them or not. The next few weeks felt surreal, like I was living in someone else's nightmare, watching everything unravel in slow motion. The investigation into the group wasn't just a rumor anymore, it had blown wide open. I hadn't told Sarah, but I'd been keeping track of it all through Lori. When Stacy was arrested, the neighborhood was buzzing with gossip. No one could believe it, the friendly neighbor who always hosted barbecues, helped with bake sales, and was involved in every charity event was at the center of something much darker. She'd been orchestrating manipulation right under our noses. Sarah wasn't arrested, but she was terrified. After our conversation, she finally cut ties with everyone, Tim, Stacy, the group. She tried to act like we could fix things between us, but the damage was too great. Any trust, any love that had been left between us had already disintegrated. I was just waiting for the right moment to move forward with the divorce. The more that came out about Stacy, the deeper I realized this mess went. As for Tim, he started cracking under the pressure. At first, I kept my distance from him, unsure if he was going to get caught up in the legal fallout or if he was just an unfortunate bystander. Then, one afternoon, he showed up at my door. I wasn't expecting him, and I wasn't sure what to say. I need to talk to you, Tim said, his voice shaky. He looked worn out, like he hadn't slept in days. Can I come in? I hesitated but stepped aside to let him in. We sat in the living room, the air thick with tension. I'm sorry, Mike, Tim started, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't know how. I knew about the group, about Stacy, about everything. Everything? I asked, my voice flat. He nodded, looking down at the floor. I knew what was happening. Sarah never told me directly, but I could see it. And Stacy, she dragged me into it. I didn't participate, but I knew. I should have warned you, but I was ashamed. I thought it wasn't my place, thought I could handle it. But now, it's all falling apart. I stared at him, anger boiling up inside me. He had known all along, known about the group, known about Sarah's involvement, and kept quiet. You were my friend, Tim, I said quietly. You could have stopped this before it got this far. I know, he replied, his voice cracking. I'm sorry, Mike. I screwed up. I didn't respond right away, just waited for him to finish. There was more he wasn't saying, and I could feel it. Tim shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped tightly together. Look, I need you to keep this quiet. I'm begging you. If this gets out that I knew, I'll lose everything, my job, my reputation. I'm done for. I know I don't deserve it, but please don't tell anyone. There was desperation in his voice. I'll make it worth your while, Tim added quickly, almost in a whisper. If you don't say anything, I'll make sure you're taken care of, money, whatever you need. Just, keep my name out of this. I stared at him, my anger rising to a boil. He was trying to buy my silence. After everything, covering for Stacy and Sarah, keeping me in the dark, now he thought he could pay me off to protect himself. I didn't say a word. Instead, I stood up, walked over to my desk, and pulled out my phone. Without making a scene, I hit record and let him keep digging his own grave. His pleading continued, his voice dripping with fear. Once I had enough, I turned to face him. You know what, Tim? You've already done enough damage. I'm not staying quiet about this. You knew exactly what was going on, and now you're just trying to save yourself. It's too late for that. Tim's face turned pale. Mike, please. You don't understand. No, I cut him off, my voice steady. I understand perfectly. And now, so will everyone else. After Tim left, I sent the recording to Lori, who forwarded it directly to the authorities. His involvement, even though he claimed he didn't participate, was enough to pull him into the investigation. Within a week, it all unraveled for him. The police questioned him, and his job caught wind of everything. Tim lost it all, his career, his reputation, his standing in the community. He was cast out, just like Stacy. Though he managed to avoid jail by cooperating, his life as he knew it was over. Meanwhile, I finally sat down with a divorce lawyer. I had everything I needed, the evidence of Sarah's involvement in the group, her lies, her betrayal. It all worked in my favor. The lawyer laid it out, with the evidence on my side, I could file for an uncontested divorce. I'd keep the house, pay minimal alimony, and likely get full custody of the kids. It was exactly what I needed to move forward, but the reality of it still hit hard. I thought back to how things used to be, how we built this family, this life together. And now, I was tearing it apart, piece by piece. But I couldn't let nostalgia hold me back. Sarah had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. In the weeks leading up to the divorce being finalized, I made the decision to sell the house. There was nothing left for me in Scranton. Everywhere I went, I saw the fragments of a life that no longer existed. The neighbors were still whispering about Stacy and Tim. Sarah kept her distance, knowing her name would be next if she stayed too close to that mess. The kids deserved a fresh start, and so did I. Denver became the plan, a new city far from all of this. I had a job lined up there already, working HVAC for a bigger company, better opportunities, more space, and most importantly, more distance. The day I signed the divorce papers, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't the closure I'd imagined, but it was freedom. Real freedom, for the first time in a long time. Sarah didn't put up a fight over the terms, maybe she knew there was no point, or maybe she was just too exhausted to resist. I packed up what was left of our life, Ethan's baseball trophies, Megan's horse figurines, and the few memories that weren't stained by everything that had happened, and loaded them into the truck. The house sold fast, and before I knew it, we were hitting the road. Standing on a ridge, overlooking the mountains in Denver, I finally felt like I could breathe again. The weight of everything that had happened in Scranton felt like a distant memory. The kids were adjusting to our new life, and for the first time in years, I felt a quiet sense of freedom. The betrayal, the lies, and the secrets had changed me, but they hadn't broken me. I knew deep down that walking away, starting over, had been the right choice. I took one last deep breath, letting the crisp mountain air fill my lungs. It was time to move forward. And with that, the past was finally behind me.